I want to bring in Father Thomas Reese from the Religious News Service. He's on the phone with us as well. Father, your reflections on the impact of Pope Francis.
He re-imaged the Catholic Church. For so long, we had been a church of kind of nagging, of finger pointing, of condemning whatever we didn't like. Here was a pope who was like Jesus, who was compassionate, who welcomed sinners, who preached the gospel of love and compassion of God, and said that the church was a field hospital for the wounded, not a country club for the beautiful people. He would just really change the whole pastoral message of the church in a way that was just so dramatic.
He certainly did, and such a gentle man in public, but also a fierce administrator when taking on those entrenched interests inside the Catholic Church.
Well, yes. On some things he was very fierce. He was especially fierce in attacking clericalism. That's the great sin of the bishops and priests, where they think they're more important than anybody else, and that. He said that, no, you're servants of the people of God. You're not. Don't act like princes. He wanted his priests and bishops to smell like the people. He said, like shepherds smell like the people, like their sheep. So he wanted them to be close to their people. He wanted them down there listening to their people. So he really wanted to change the whole culture of the church, of how the clergy operated, how the church was run. And we saw that especially recently in the synods that we had last year and the year before, where he invited bishops, priests, lay people to participate in a discussion about the future of the church, to come together, to have a conversation, to pray together, to discern, and to try and decide where God is calling us to be and who God is calling us to be right now in the world.
You talk about him changing the culture of the church. In many ways, he was changing the culture that was established and entrenched under his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI. And of course, Pope Benedict retired and stayed near Vatican City, which led to a somewhat awkward relationship.
Yeah, it was very unusual because we hadn't had a pope resign in such a long time in the history of the church, hundreds of years. So nobody really knew what the protocol was, and nobody had really thought it through. I thought that Benedict behaved himself well. He retired to kind of a monastery in the middle of the Vatican City. He spent his time in prayer and reflection. Every once in a while, somebody would kind of seduce him into making some comment, and of course, everybody tried to play it as in conflict with the Pope. But I thought he was pretty loyal to Pope Francis and lived his retirement well. We just don't know how to do that yet. We don't know how to have a retired Pope.
Father Reese, thank you very much. I also want to bring in Father Jim Martin, who's joined us here in the studio, our friend and analyst of the papacy. I want to pick up on when we were just left off with Father Thomas Reese. Pope Francis actually came in second in the balloting to Pope Benedict back in 2005. Thought his chances of ever being Pope had passed.
Yeah, he was ready to retire again as Archbishop of Buenos Aires. God had other things in mind. He was clearly someone who was on the mind of people the next time the conclave came around. But really, I still think it was a surprise for most of us. He was not on our top list. And, we Jesuits, he's a Jesuit like I am, we make a public promise not to strive for or ambition high offices in the church. And so this is not something that he sought, that's for sure.
How do you think it happened?
Well, I think they saw someone who was very holy, was someone who was very devoted to the poor. Apparently during the run-up to the conclave, if people saw the movie Conclave, they'll understand this. He made a speech, a very short 3-minute speech, where he said the church needed to be more outward focused than inward focused. So I think they liked what they saw. He was the right age. You're not someone who's going to be there for decades. But he was someone who I think people saw as holy, close to the poor, and someone who would take the church more outward facing.
You talk about being the right age. So was he being seen, do you think, by his fellow cardinals then as kind of a transitional figure from Benedict?
That's a good question. I think he may have been at 78. They don't want to elect someone who's too young. You don't want someone who's 50 years old who's going to be in there for 40 years. You don't want someone who's decrepit. So I think that's about the right age for people. And perhaps they thought, we'll see how long this guy lasts, but maybe a transitional pope. That was the thought at the time.
So what do you expect at this point? I know it's very difficult to read, but in some ways, Pope Francis was a reaction to Pope Benedict. Will we see a reaction to him as the cardinals gather again to choose a new pope?
That's probably less likely since he has appointed so many of the cardinals. I mean, the majority of the cardinals are appointed by Pope Francis. I think you're going to see someone, who knows? I think you're going to see someone who may be a little less revolutionary. From my time in Rome recently, people were saying they want someone who would be a little more sort of calmer, right, in terms of, maybe more of an administrator, maybe not someone who is quite so...
less outspoken on the big world issues?
Who knows? On the other hand, given the turn in world politics where you have more authoritarianism, they may want someone who is just as strong on human dignity and the poor, and focusing on migrants and refugees as Pope Francis, but it's hard to say.
He was facing quite a clash here with American conservative Catholics.
I think that's accurate among some. There was a very loud, very well organized, and very vocal group that really, to my mind, talked about him in a way that I'd never heard any Catholic leader or commentator talk about a pope before. So he really had to put up with a lot. I think he was very patient as well with that crowd.
Do you think he ever considered retiring?
I don't know. I think it's interesting to see that you have someone like St. John Paul and Pope Benedict both facing the same challenge. What do I do when I'm an elderly person in the papacy? John Paul retires, Pope Benedict stays on. I think it's up to each person. But towards the end, my sense was from people who knew him, he did not want to retire. We got a Jesuit who is not only free and holy and funny, but someone who's a hard worker too.
And someone like St. John Paul, who was not shy about using his own frailty in his later years to set an example.
Yeah, I don't think the Pope he was very free. And so he, in a sense, wasn't embarrassed that he would come out in a poncho and being wheeled with those nasal things in St. Peter's Square. I think he understood himself as very human, very frail. And that is a kind of teaching moment that we all of us have bodies. All of us get sick, all of us die. And so he's not afraid to show that, even up to Easter.
We're joined also by our senior investigative correspondent, Aaron Katursky. Teaching moment as well on the issue of dealing with all of the sexual abuse problems in the Catholic Church.
It was a nagging problem when he was ascending to the papacy, George, and in many ways I think brought the church almost into the Me Too era in expanding its understanding of how sexual abuse occurs, who it can happen to, and who the perpetrators can be. It wasn't just children. He recognized that adults could fall victim as well, and he changed the way the church approached punishment. It became criminal, not just something for the Vatican to deal with internally.
It seemed like something, Father Martin, that he was also learning as he went as well, an issue not without its missteps.
Oh no, I mean, we were all learning, and there's never enough that we can do to address this problem. One of the things he did to close a loophole was to put in requirements for or penalties for bishops, who had covered up or even themselves had done abuse. And so that was a loophole that he really needed to close, and he did. He met frequently with victims. One of his closest friends, Juan Carlos Cruz, who became an advisor to the Pontifical Commission for the Abuse of Minors, was himself an abuse victim. And so he was very close to victims, and particularly at the beginning of his papacy, he met with them pretty much on all of the trips, just to send a message. But I think he did as much as any person could have.
And on so many issues, like gay rights, like women in the church, trying to signal openness and grace while also holding to the church's teachings.
Yeah, I mean, the times that I met with him, it was mostly about LGBTQ Catholics, and his Concern was really to be pastorally present to them, to walk with them, to know them. Yeah, and the same with women and migrants and refugees and people who felt marginalized and who were marginalized by the church and are marginalized by the church. He focused on what he called the culture of encounter, which is seeing people not as individuals or stereotypes or groups even, but as people, right, that you want to get to know. And that was really a hallmark of his papacy.
Which leads perhaps to the most famous words of his papacy, "Who am I to judge?"
Yeah, who am I to judge, which he said in response to a question about gay priests. And I think that's revolutionary because it enabled people to talk about that issue. And it also showed that really, I mean, we're not supposed to judge. This is what Jesus asked us not to do. And I think that'll be remembered, I agree with you, as his 5 most famous words.
At the heart of Jesus' teachings, yet in some ways, you talked about the word revolutionary, unimaginable to hear a pope say that.
Yeah, and it's ironic because more people should say that. We're not supposed to judge. But this is a pope who really knew the Gospels well and who really tried to be a follower of Jesus as much as he could be, even when it led him into difficult situations like that.
Okay.